I should preface this by saying that this happened to my girlfriend, now wife, and also me too around 2005 at our first apartment, which was a really old building built around the 1920s, and prior to this incident we had already experienced several strange and frightening things, but this was definitely on another level. So when moving there, we noticed one of the bedrooms would get extremely cold, even in mid-July. We live in West Texas, mind you. Also, my girlfriend had a couple of angel statues that her mum gifted her, and whenever we would get home from work, they would be facing the corner wall, almost as if, someone didn't want to look at them, so they would turn them. One time too, my girlfriend left for work early morning, and I was still in bed just watching TV, and I swear that I heard the front door open and close. I figured that she'd forgotten something, so I called out her name, and there was no response. I turned my head towards the bedroom door and saw a strange face peek out the corner and hide. It honestly scared the life out of me, and I ran to the living room, but there was nobody there. But the scariest thing to ever happen to us, and ultimately was the deciding factor in us moving, happened one night around 10 p.m. My girlfriend and I were just at home listening to some music, having a couple of beers. This was pre-YouTube era, so we were listening to CDs on my Xbox, when we heard a knock on the door. We were wondering who would have been knocking so late, but my girlfriend noticed that it was a little old lady through the peephole. We opened up, and this old Mexican lady in really old-fashioned clothes asked us in Spanish, "Is Crystal here? She's my daughter." My girlfriend and I are both bilingual, so we understood her, but what freaked us out was my girlfriend's name is Crystal too. My girlfriend is bugging out and tells her, "My name is Crystal, but I don't know you." The old lady gets visibly upset by this and says, "No, I've been waiting a very long time, and I know she lives here. Tell me where she is, now." And she's tearing up as she says this. I tell her, "Lady, there's no Crystal here for you," and at that I just shut the door. My girlfriend gets upset at this and says maybe she needs our help, and I swear on all that is holy and on a stack of Bibles that the door, it must have been shut for no more than 10 seconds max when my girlfriend opened it, and the lady, she was gone. Our front door has a wide walkway too that you can see some walking up from quite a distance, and there was just no way that a little old lady in her shape, that frail, could have ran off or gotten out of sight that quickly. And man, were we bugging the heck out. I swear to this day too that I'll never forget that old lady crying in Spanish just looking for her daughter Crystal, and just how desperate her voice was. We moved only a week after that, but it's a memory that is definitely going to stay with me. As a child, I had a few frightening experiences in the woods behind my childhood home. We lived there until I was 17. I'm 24 now, and a few weeks ago, I think I finally found a possible explanation for what happened. The house itself was also haunted, I think, but I'll save that for another time. Although they are tied together, I think, but anyway, I spent a lot of time hiking and exploring, mostly alone while I was there. The location is rural southwestern Pennsylvania, on the border of West Virginia Panhandle, if anyone's interested. The forest behind our property was a few miles deep, I think, and in it was a small valley with a creek at the bottom. It was actually really pretty and had multiple waterfalls too. There was also a natural spring, a bog or swamp sort of thing, a huge section of bent trees covered in thick vines, and a cluster of mining equipment across the creek. The tree line was also about 60 yards from our back door. The large trail that went down into the valley was in the center of the tree line that bordered our yard, just beyond the start of the trees. There was also a smaller trail to the right that ran along the edge of our yard and branched off into a thick vine area. So, with that out of the way, let me get into some of the stories. So my first prominent memory was the day that I heard the voice. I was about 11 years old, I think, and it was late fall. The leaves had fallen and it was pretty cold, but it wasn't snowing yet. Weeds and brush were pretty thin. There was a lot of visibility, in other words. and I had walked down the main trail for about 10 minutes to the bottom where the trail veered to the left. There was a small clearing at the bend where my dad would dump grass clippings and old straw bales. I frequently walked to this area. It was more like an extension of our yard, to be honest, but I never felt afraid there. But this time, I don't know why, I just felt weird. A weird feeling washed over me, like I was being watched. I called out, "Hello?" And immediately a child's voice responded with hello back. It sounded so close that it was as if they were standing directly in front of me. I stood there in disbelief for a moment, but eventually started looking around. The leaves were on the ground and crunchy, so I would have heard footsteps for sure, but there were absolutely none anywhere. None of the homes around us had small children too, and I even checked the trees for tree stands, but there was nothing. It didn't terrify me, but I definitely didn't want to stay down there for sure, so I decided to go back up to our house. I must have been about halfway up the trail too when I felt 2 taps on my left shoulder. I whipped around expecting to catch my brothers messing with me, but when I did, nobody was there. And again, I didn't hear any footsteps. I didn't see anything. I started walking again and felt the same 2 taps about 30 seconds later. And that was it for me. I ran as fast as I could until I got home. That was the first time that I heard the child's voice, and as the years went on, I began hearing it inside the house as well, but that's a different story, and it was really freaky. So the second story I have was, I was born in 96, so we had internet access growing up, but it wasn't like we have today. We also didn't have cell phones yet, but that being said, I never thought to look up our house on Google Maps until after we moved. Earlier I mentioned how the woods were a few miles deep, but for most of my life I assumed that there was another house or a road up on the other side of the valley. We often heard the sounds of people talking and also some children playing off in the distance. Nothing creepy, it just sounded like we were getting close to perhaps another property and people were outside or something, almost like an echo. Our parents always told us that we owned the land down to the creek, so we rarely explored to the other side, but I did try on one occasion. I was older this time, probably about 14 I think. I had hiked down to the creek and was now following it upstream to the east, when I came across a large trail going up onto the side that we didn't own. I decided that I wanted to finally see who lived up there, so I walked for about 5 minutes, and then I began smelling something just horribly rotten. I was gagging and had to hold my nose at one point, and about 20 feet in front of me was a dead deer sitting just off the trail to the left. I convinced myself to walk past it, and the smell settled, so I continued down the trail a bit. The trail flattened out and turned to the right. It seemed like it was getting darker too, but it was still early afternoon, so that was weird. The trees seemed thicker and closer now too, like the trail was narrowing. I walked for about 30 yards when I came across a dead rabbit sitting directly in the middle of the trail at my feet. And that was when it hit me. Something was wrong. My flight or fight response kicked in and a wave of fear suddenly hit me. The trail was also really dark now, and I swear that I could see the trees moving inward toward me like a tunnel vision. Up until this point too, I heard the voices of people, but now, all of a sudden, it was completely silent, like there was nothing, not even insects. I turned around quickly and I bolted down the trail. The feeling of fear went away once I finally crossed back to our side. Now, I guess it could have been a bear or a coyote or something. We do have natural defense instincts if we don't see it, but another thing to note is that the deer and the rabbit, they weren't eaten or bloody. They were just dead. After we moved, though, I went on Google Maps, satellite view to show someone at my new school where I used to live, and I zoomed out, and that's when I realized that there was nothing behind the house but trees. There was never another house back there. There was never any other people that should have been there at least. So the question is, where was that noise coming from, and who were those people? The third story I have was, there was a small field between us and our neighbours to the right. Their yard dipped into a hill right before the tree line, and that section wasn't mowed frequently because of the hill and was often just sort of tall grass. We were outside with the neighbour girl at one point. She was a few years older than me when we found a sort of bronze owl figurine sitting in the tall grass. It wasn't buried, it was on top of the grass. We took it to her mum thinking that it was hers, but she said that it wasn't. We asked my parents and it wasn't theirs either. We even asked the neighbours on the other side and it wasn't theirs. It was too far from the road to have fallen from a car or be thrown out like litter or something. And I mean, who is really out there littering with bronze anyway? So I just took it home. I kept it in my room for a while, but it began to really creep me out. Our house is already haunted, like I mentioned at the beginning, but things seemed more frequent since bringing this thing in. I didn't want to throw it away, though. I didn't want to disrespect it like that, so I took it into the woods by myself and left it on a stump far from the trail. I don't even remember where the stump was, to be honest, but I felt better with it out of the house, that was for sure. The next spring, my dad was tilling and ploughing and getting ready to plant the corn for the year, and to my absolute amazement, he dug it up out of the ground. That same owl figurine with the same marking underneath. There was a black marking on the bottom as if it had sat on top of something for a long time. And I couldn't believe it. He tilled every year. There was just no way another one was in there that whole time. We couldn't explain it, but we just sort of kept it in the end. In fact, it sat on our kitchen window until the day that we moved. And then it came with us. My mum actually threw it out a few weeks ago. I didn't know until she did, but I still have a picture of it, and maybe I'll share it with you guys sometime. And I know it doesn't prove anything, but you can even still see the dirt in the little crevices from where it was buried. That one was a weird one, and something I still don't have an explanation for. My dad still talks from time to time about it too, because even he thought it was a bit weird. There were other smaller things too about the woods that weren't exactly necessarily paranormal, but definitely odd. Like, there were one set of vines that came down into a circle with an opening like a doorway. Think of the shape of like a teepee. I didn't like going into that area with the bent trees alone. Some had 90-degree bends in them and were sort of covered in thick vines. It felt like a whole different forest in there too. My brothers and I used to say that there were witches in that part, or pretend that it was cursed. Playtime can get a bit weird when you grow up in a haunted house, let me tell you. I only ever saw the mining equipment once too. I never found it again. Sometimes I would wonder if it was really there, but my brothers were with me that time and they saw it too. There was a mine cart, some track, and even a large machine. I never saw a mine entrance, but my brother swears to this day that he found one once. The natural spring could have affected the level of activity, I know, but I think that that's a theory in the paranormal world at least. The swamp was really random. It wasn't at the bottom of the valley near the creek either. The hillside just sort of flattened out, and it was sort of like a bog. Picture sort of thick vertical weeds and cattails taller than you are. The center was cleared out in a sort of circle shape, and I actually walked through it once. It was only a foot deep, although I'm glad I only went in it once because there could have been an opening or a deep spot for sure. I was foolish to assume that I could walk in it, but anyway, it's what I did. To the left of the main trail, about, I would say 10 yards into the tree line, there was also a large gaping hole that was partially filled in with cement blocks and bricks. And one day when I was young, I distinctly remember speaking in gibberish as I was hiking alone. I can't remember why I did that. I just started doing it. And it really sounded like another language, which is weird. Anyway, even as an adult and someone who hasn't lived there for like 7 years now, I still have reoccurring nightmares about those woods. Not so much the house, but definitely the woods. A month or two ago, I even had a vivid dream and decided that I needed answers. I'm from a small town and a lot of people have family from the original settlers. So I posted on Facebook asking if anyone knew or had family that knew the history of this area. And as luck would have it, one of the guys that I went to school with, he messaged me. He explained how his grandparents were original to the village, and he said that there was an entire mining town up the road from us that's no longer there. Only a few houses remain, but the mines, however, extended down the road to the area where our house now stands. He has pictures and maps of it, in fact, and he asked what our address was and asked a family friend of ours for more info. This man said that the main portal to one of the mines, it was directly behind our house, which could explain the gaping filled-in hole just behind the tree line. I asked him if there were any incidences or death in the mines, and he said that there were many accidents, but he didn't know the specifics. Then, before I could even ask, he said, and I still get chills just thinking about this, that 8-year-old boys and even younger kids worked in the mines too. He sent me a photo of his grandfather with some other miners, and there were 2 young boys in the picture. And, well, I have to ask myself, what if a child died and that was who I was hearing? He's also a local firefighter and said that they still get calls from people falling through the air shafts into the mine sometimes. He said that the EPA finally came in after we moved close to some of the portals. There's a town heritage centre in one of the still standing mine houses, but before that opened, people still lived there. One day the kids climbed under the house while playing and found human remains apparently, and after an investigation they determined that it was from the clan initiations back in the day. It seemed like it was kept quiet, and he said the entire area is known for being haunted. The dark history of the place apparently goes all the way back to the battles with the Native Americans when it was first settled. Other firemen and his parents have seen things too, and it's just a really, really old and active place. As far as we know, there were no deaths in our house. I always wondered if it was from the land, not the building, and I guess that all of this, it solidified my theory. I really can't believe that I waited this long to reach out to people in the community like this. It's just such a relief knowing that I'm not alone and there could be a reason for all of this. My brother, my fiancé, and I have also decided to go back into the woods sometime in the next few weeks to see if we can find anything again or feel anything. I don't know. Maybe I need closure, or maybe I'm still not done with this, but either way, wish me luck. So, I was a patient of Larry Nassar. While my story is not even comparable to his victim stories, I still find this incredibly creepy to look back on. I don't really tell this story to many people because some have thought that I'm lying or just wanting attention, which is so far from the truth. Anyway, I was a freshman in high school. My orthopedic surgeon referred me to Larry for him to look at my hips to see if my issues were hip-related. My mother came with me to this appointment, and when we came into the room, he introduced himself to both of us. He had a team of interns with him too, and I remember him feeling my hips and my buttocks and just being overall kind of touchy. Obviously, he was there to look at my hips, so he had to touch me to examine them, but he seemed to kind of touch and grab my butt more than necessary. He also had me get up and walk so that he could examine my movements. I could feel his eyes on my butt the whole time, but again, he was examining my hips, so how do I really know what he was doing? He did a couple of adjustments, though, with my hips, and then sent us on our way. The moment that strikes me the most, though, when looking back on this appointment, is that when my mother and I stepped out of the room, I looked at her and said, I don't ever want to see him again. My mum remembers this moment too, because she could see how strongly I felt about not seeing him again. Looking back, it's kind of crazy that my young self felt like that. My intention, too, is not to discount the victims in any way, and I'm really unsure how to tell this story without sounding arrogant or offensive. When I learned, though, that he was charged with all of these assaults, I was shocked to say the least. Everything did make sense, though, when I looked back at that appointment. I think about the other girls often, and I hope they found peace and strength in their healing. As for Larry, I hope he rots in hell. This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. So after meeting with a couple of friends who were stationed near the bar, my friend Robin and I decided to end girls' night early, at 1 a.m. I'm horrible with street names too, so bear with me. We went to Rocket Bar, so you know it was near there, but we got in the car and started pulling out. We're driving a bit slow because we're not too familiar with the area, so we didn't want to miss any turns. I had the window rolled down because when I drink I get a bit flushed. The streets that we were on, though, were a bit dead at the time. But then we heard a yell and some really loud-ass crying. It was clearly a lady's voice, so we slowed down to see what was going on. Robin was driving and I was in the passenger seat. On our right, we saw this lady stumble out of the street holding her chest and crying. Robin locked the doors and cautiously rolled my window up, leaving only an inch open. And thank God that happened. The lady came right up to my window and said, "I need help." I asked, "What's wrong, honey?" She kept repeating, "I need help," just over and over again. Me, being a naive idiot, put my hand on the door like I'm about to open it, only to be grabbed by Robin whispering, "Don't open that door." The lady who had been mumbling, "I need help," repeatedly like she was slurring, saw Robin stop me, and her eyes opened wide as hell, and she started yelling, "I need help, let me in." We started yelling, "Stop that," and the lady started yanking at my door handle, and Robin said, "Oh hell no," and we started pulling away. I shit you not too, the next 30 seconds were terrifying. The lady yelled to someone, "They're leaving," and we saw two guys run out from a car parked a few cars behind us on the right. Robin sped away like a scene in an action movie. We looked in a rearview mirror and saw the three of them standing in the street. And the moral of this story is, please be careful. I can't imagine what would have happened to my dumbass if it weren't for my friend that night. I know it's in a lot of us to want to help other people, but there's a lot of people out there who disguise themselves to do us harm. Be aware of your surroundings and lock your doors in DC, because, like me, it may just save your ass one night. Before I begin, yes, I made a lot of dumb decisions. Yes, I should have probably called the police, but here it goes. So, when I was around 15, I lived alone in a 2-story house. Although there were bedrooms upstairs, I would always sleep on the living room couch. This was for 2 reasons. 1, it was the central location of the house, so I could hear everything. And 2, it was actually equidistant from every exit. So one night, at around 2 in the morning I'd say, I heard somebody jiggling the front doorknob. It was a slow, cautious jiggling, like they were trying to not be heard, and when the door didn't open, they didn't stop. The jiggling slowly became less cautious and more irritated. They persisted for at least 2 minutes. They then went to the back door, which was also locked. I didn't want to call the police because I was an unemancipated minor living alone. I didn't want to be placed in foster care, and I didn't want my parents in trouble for neglect. Eventually, though, the jiggling stopped, and I stayed up that night, waiting for them to try other entrances, but nothing happened. A few nights passed, and I woke up to the sound of a door opening upstairs. The doors in the house would really stick, so they took a lot of force to open, and when you popped them loose, they made a kind of loud scrape or a pop or shutter noise kind of thing. At the time, I was actually taking sleeping pills as well, and it made it hard to fully awaken. And at the time, I would also sometimes only awaken with sleep paralysis. So that meant that I couldn't quite determine whether or not I dreamt the sound or whether I'd actually awoken from it. I started to fall back asleep, and I thought that I heard the doors close, like grinding of wood rubbing together. And then the sound of bed springs screeching, like the weight was being shifted. I thought that maybe somebody is homeless and they thought that this was an abandoned house. I was super tired and wasn't even sure if I was actually conscious, and I definitely wasn't thinking straight. But eventually I fell back asleep and I awoke to the feeling of somebody watching me. There were stairs parallel to the living room door, and I could see them from the couch. Halfway down the stairwell, I could see a long-haired man crouched over, just looking at me. It was dark, and I felt like we were both just trying to verify what we were seeing. I kept a metal baseball bat by the couch, and I grabbed it. Slowly, the man erected his body, and without turning, just backed up the stairs. I just listened for him to leave, or waited for him to come back down, but I heard neither. It was like he just stood at the top of the stairs waiting for me, and I didn't go back to sleep that night. I heard nothing, even until sunrise, and when I left for school that morning, I really questioned what I'd actually experienced. I had my boyfriend over later that evening, and as we approached the house, he said, "Hey, your window is open." I looked, and the room to the sticking door was wide open. I told him what I had experienced the night before, and he helped me check out the house, and after finding nothing, I closed the door and locked the windows. I figured that it must have been a hobo, and once they realized somebody lived there, they must have left. I still stayed there that night, but I didn't take sleeping pills. And boy, am I grateful that I didn't, because I awoke to the door opening again, and this time I knew that it was real. They knew somebody lived here, but they had still returned, which meant that this situation was getting pretty dangerous. At this time in my life, I had little value for my life, and I had no fear of death because I knew where I'd go. I decided, too, that I wasn't going to hide in my own house. So I got my baseball bat, turned on the lights, and I marched straight upstairs. I yelled something like, "Listen, buddy, I'm coming up. Be out by the time that I get there." I heard nothing, and prepared for the worst. I checked the rooms and the closets, but when I did, I found nothing. And all the windows were closed. I checked down the stairs and found nothing as well. I felt pretty silly after finding nothing, but I still stayed up that night. I got ready for school the next morning, and I saw that the window was open again. It occurred to me, too, that I hadn't checked under the beds when I'd done the search. I didn't have my bat with me, and so I bailed. But to think that an intruder was possibly hiding under the bed as I searched the house is really unnerving, to say the least. I am partially relieved, though, that I hadn't checked. If I'd bent down and come face to face with a man beneath my bed, the story may have ended very differently. So, something really disturbing has started to happen after a joke me and my significant other started. A while back, about a week or two ago I think, my other half was in the kitchen making dinner for us, and I jokingly but in a very unusual way said "yum yum" as I looked at what she was making. Then, about a day or two later, I think it happened. So, my other half was in the room changing and comes out of the bedroom laughing, saying, "Stop it, babe. It's so creepy and not funny anymore." And I'm a little bit confused. I had just gotten out of the shower for the morning and was focused on brushing my teeth. I didn't respond, and she smiles and laughs and says, "The yum yum thing. It's not funny, babe. It's gross and weird." I explain that I didn't do anything. And they say, jokingly, this is all in good spirit, mind you, that I'm totally full of crap. Well, today it happened again, but this time I heard it too. It's not right, and it's scary, and we're freaking out. It was in our bedroom, yum yum again, and it sounds just like me. Now, there is some deep history to our house, Ouija boards and past murders before we moved in and such, but this is new, and it's beyond explaining just how unsettling this is. I'll update too if we maybe can get some audio of it or something, but for now, do any of you guys have any ideas of what this is and what we can do about it? I've been thinking about this experience a lot lately, and I need to get it off my chest. So, I was headed to my little sister's dance competition downtown all by myself. I was a sophomore or junior in high school when this happened, and I was new to driving. My parents had turned off my data as a form of punishment for God knows what. I wasn't able to use a GPS, I couldn't text or call anyone. I had never been to the building that my sister and the rest of my family were at. It was slightly raining and it was night time. It was already notably a bad night, but it was about to get a lot worse. So I was driving all around downtown in what felt like circles. I was frustrated and had no idea where I was. Then I go down a hill and I suddenly realize where I am. I'm on a one-way road that gets onto a busy highway. You merge immediately into a bridge that takes you to the other side of the river. And now I'm really panicking. I have no choice but to get onto the highway. The road goes under the bridge. It takes this turn to the right, where it kind of loops left onto the highway to merge onto the right. I'm not sure if that makes total sense, but basically you're under the highway and kind of turning. As I'm turning under the bridge, my lights illuminate the curve ahead of me, and that was when I see it. I see this person in a black hood that looks like it goes to his feet, holding a long stick, just standing there motionless on the grass, maybe 15 feet from the road. I remember screaming out of shock that someone was there, but then out of fear and kind of disbelief. I quickly drove past it and I stared at it, but I never saw a face. I merged onto the highway and drove super safely, slightly convinced that I'd seen the Grim Reaper and was about to die. I kept telling myself that that wasn't what I saw. It was just a person. It was nothing. I imagined it all. But what I saw was immediately ingrained in my memory. Even now I tell myself that maybe it was just a homeless person. But what was he wearing? And the stick? How he just stood there too, I'll never forget. Also, my city doesn't have a ton of homeless people, and that highway area is closer to the river than they usually are. But anyway, I turned around in the neighbouring town, and when I crossed the river, eventually I found where my sister's dance competition was, and I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I've since told my family, but I don't think that they really took it too seriously. I spent the rest of the year with this fear in the back of my mind that I was going to die. It really affected me too. Still, when I think about it, I get really freaked out as well, thinking that maybe I dodged some fate that was meant for me that night. Who knows?